Ever need to share a fastmcp server setup with your team, only to realize everyone's using different CLI arguments and environment variables? We'll configure a portable fastmcp.json that declares your server's location, entrypoint, and optional environment settings, all with IDE auto-completion and validation. You'll see how this single file replaces command line arguments, supports environment-specific configurations like dev versus prod, and even handles dynamic values through VAR, interpolation, while keeping everything version-controlled and reproducible.
Schema https://gofastung.com/public/schemas/fastmcp json/v1 json. Source: path server pi. Entrypoint MCP.
This demonstrates the declarative configuration pattern with optional hierarchical sections, where a single JSON file replaces imperative CLI arguments as the canonical source of truth for fastmcp servers. The pattern distinguishes itself by making only the source section mandatory, while treating environment and deployment as optional layers that progressively add reproducibility and runtime control. Modern IDEs leverage the schema reference to provide autocomplete and validation, turning configuration into a first-class, version-controllable artifact. The approach works through three conceptual layers that map to fundamental questions, where source location and entrypoint, what environment requirements with dependency resolution, and how deployment behavior with transport and logging. Environment variable interpolation using VAR. Syntax enables dynamic values without modifying the file, while the optional type fields defaulting to file system for source and UV for environment maintain backward compatibility. This hierarchy allows the same pattern to scale from simple local development to complex production deployments using environment-specific files like dev, fastmcp, JSON, or prod, fastmcp, JSON. This configuration-first approach solves the problem of environment drift and undocumented CLI arguments by making server requirements explicit and shareable. The trade-off of initial setup pays dividends in maintainability, particularly when migrating from CLI arguments to configuration files, as the structured format self-documents while supporting overrides via fastmcp run file, JSON port 8080. The pattern excels in team environments, CI/CD pipelines, or anywhere consistency matters more than one-off flexibility, with the added benefit that undefined interpolated variables preserve their placeholders rather than failing. Let's break it down line by line. This defines fastmcp's configuration using a JSON schema that enables IDE validation and auto-completion. The required source section specifies the server entry point, with path pointing to the Python file and entrypoint naming the initialization function, while type defaults to file system if omitted. Optional sections like environment and deployment support variable interpolation via VAR syntax, and you can maintain separate files for dev/prod environments. This approach replaces CLI arguments, provides version-controlled documentation, and allows running specific configs with fastmcp run file name, JSON.
Schema https://gofastung.com/public/schemas/fastmcp json/v1 json.
This schema declaration enables IDE validation, auto-completion, and linting by referencing fastmcp's official JSON schema. It transforms your config file into a first-class citizen with type checking, preventing invalid fields or typos while allowing environment variable interpolation via VAR syntax. Modern editors will flag errors immediately and suggest valid properties as you type.
Source.
The source key specifies the entry point for your fastmcp application, with path pointing to the Python file, and entrypoint, naming the initialization function. This required field defaults to type file system when unspecified and works with optional environment and deployment sections for advanced setups. The configuration file replaces CLI arguments as the single source of truth, supports VAR, syntax for environment variable interpolation, and enables environment-specific setups, dev/prod, through separate files. Modern IDEs leverage the schema for validation and auto-completion, while version control ensures consistent deployments.
Path server pi.
Specifies the server entry point file using fastmcp's declarative configuration pattern. This required field defines the Python module containing your MCP tools and server logic, while the optional source type defaults to file system for local file paths. The configuration replaces CLI arguments as the single source of truth, supports environment variable interpolation via VAR, syntax, and enables environment-specific files for dev/prod separation.
Entrypoint MCP.
Defines the initialization function fastmcp executes when starting. This entrypoint, MCP, must be an async function that registers all AI callable tools, replacing the need for CLI arguments in most cases. The configuration pattern supports environment variable interpolation via VAR, syntax, optional source type, defaults to file system, and enables running different environments via fastmcp run filename, JSON, with full IDE validation from the schema reference. This closing brace completes the fastmcp.json configuration object, ensuring valid syntax for the server setup. The configuration defines the server entry point in server, pi with the MCP function, while supporting optional fields like environment variables, using VAR syntax and multiple environment-specific files. Modern IDEs leverage the schema field for auto-completion and validation, and this file replaces most CLI arguments while enabling version-controlled, reproducible deployments across dev/prod environments. This closing brace completes the fastmcp configuration JSON, ensuring valid syntax for the framework to parse. The configuration defines the server entry point while supporting optional sections like environment variables and deployment settings, with source type defaulting to file system when unspecified. Modern IDEs leverage the schema field for autocomplete and validation, while the file itself serves as version-controlled documentation that replaces most CLI arguments. FastMCP Configuration Foundation. The FastMCP JSON schema replaces command line complexity with declarative JSON, where only the source section is required while environment and deployment remain optional for progressive configuration. The source type defaults to file system when omitted and undefined VAR. Interpolations silently resolve to empty strings without warning. Modern IDEs transform this configuration into a first-class development experience through schema-based validation and autocomplete, while version control ensures reproducible deployments across environments.
The configuration that removes all options becomes the only option worth configuring.